Space, the final frontier. Space Station Ashland sits on the edge of Federation space with its companion ship, the U.S.S. Dilamus Christian. The space around them is full of mystery and strange wonders, where secrets are kept and danger lurks around every corner. The crew of the Dilamus Christian must navigate treacherous waters as they work to protect the Federation. But as they peer into the unknown, they will discover that the line between friend and foe is not always clear. They will be tested like never before and will face challenges that will push them to their limits. Join us on this adventure as we explore the farthest reaches of space and uncover the hidden truths that lie within the shadows. Tabletop Journeys presents Star Trek Preservations.
Welcome, travelers. I'm Lee Wanika, one of the hosts of Tabletop Journeys and one of the GMs for Star Trek Preservations. Joining me today is one of our cast members for Star Trek Preservations as we do a bit of a wrap-up on Season 2, this particular cast member's first season on the show, and kind of a teaser for the upcoming things in Season 3. So without further ado, I'm going to have our cast member today introduce themselves to you, the audience. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. This is Lacey Knudson, and I've been playing Lieutenant Nerila Neelan, the science officer on the Dilamus Christian. And I've been having a really great time through this season, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Awesome. Lacey, thanks for joining me today. For the audience, we've finished all of our recordings for Season 2 for the most part. A couple things I'm going to be adding a little bit later, but for the most part, Season 2 has wrapped. None of the cast members that we're going to be speaking to over the next few weeks have, at the time of this recording, recorded the season opener for Season 3, so nobody knows what happens at this time after the cliffhanger you all have been left with. So this is your time to catch up, see where we are, get to where we are, then check out these interviews so you have an idea of where the cast members and their characters are, so you as well as they can be a part of the excitement that will be coming in the next couple of weeks. To get us started, I think the easiest thing for me to say is, Lacey, take a moment to reintroduce yourself to our audience as far as who you are outside of the context of the Star Trek Adventures game that you've been a part of for about a year now.
All right. So I have been playing role-playing games for a really long time. I started playing in middle school at a local gaming store. I started with a non-D&D game and then got introduced to D&D at a RPG day, and then have since explored many other different systems. This is my first time playing Star Trek, and it's also my first real solid introduction to Star Trek, but I'm getting more excited about it after playing this. I also work as a scientist, so I thought that it might be easy to jump into this game with using some of my real life science background to implement into my character, which has not been completely successful, but not complete loss either. I also was in the Marine Corps for 5 years. The command structure of the game also is an interesting part of the dynamic that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, as a veteran myself, when I was younger, and especially while I was in, I always found the military elements of Star Trek to be very weird because for as military as non-military people think they are, those of us who have been in the military know how military they absolutely are not, right? And that is right on the tip of the nose for those of us who've served. If I'm allowed to speak for others, which danger lies ahead, Will Robinson, danger. Across streams too. But I've always found that to be interesting. And often when I'm doing a Star Trek game, especially with folks who've been in the military, that is actually one of the things that they find most challenging is the suspension of disbelief, because opposed to this is the Star Trek style military, they keep trying to equate it to their military. And Star Trek has, at times, interesting things to say about the military. It is definitely a needle that must be threaded. And as a GM, I think I do my best to be respectful and accurate to the aspirations of Star Trek, as well as the realities for those of us who have been in, and respectful for the job that is still being done to this very day by very competent and qualified individuals. That is a big responsibility for me to make sure we're doing that, recognizing that it's fiction. It's a fictional military esque situation. It's interesting you mentioned the science portion of it being somewhat successful. I want to dig into that. But with this little preface, so I found out that the science advisor on the current Star Trek shows, all of them, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and Strange New Worlds, formerly Discovery, is a PhD scientist as well, Dr. Erin McDonald, PhD. So not only has she been an advisor for a while, and she is a scientist, she's a doctorate level scientist. She also has been a writer on the second edition book. There's a whole 10 mission briefs that she has written, and I've actually run one of them at a convention. Real world scientists are part of this game, even with all of its fictional nature. And if anybody has not watched Star Trek Prodigy, I strongly recommend it, because she not only does her thing, and it's a bit of a spoiler for season 2, she actually appears as an animated character within season 2, discussing time dilation and all of those things, teaching the characters of the show, because Prodigy is designed for younger kids to help them learn Star Trek. So she's actually the hologram program teaching them about the rules of time travel as per the Federation. And it's amazing, especially if you know the meta that this is an actual scientist who is their science advisor, who actually is trying to get real known science into each of these episodes. So amazing setup. I'm interested in the parts of your real world work that seem to work well with Star Trek versus the parts that are like, yeah, I just have to give that as a given and move along kind of thing.
Interestingly, Dr. McDonald's an astrophysicist. I'm not a doctorate. I'm almost finished with my master's degree, and I'm a bench scientist. I do a lot in biology and also designing experiments and interpreting data and things like that. So in that ways, when I'm like thinking about how to approach problems and what kind of information that I'm looking for, and how to gather the most important aspects or the questions to ask, I think it's really helpful to look at it from a scientific lens, like an actual scientific lens. Even if, like we had earlier in the season, we were working with artifacts. That's not quite bench science, but I felt like it helped me to ask the kind of questions I wanted to know about them. How it doesn't so much work is because a science officer feels very broad. There's so many different ways you can be a scientist modernly. Um, like an astrophysicist fits probably really well, but maybe someone who works in research cardiovascular challenges, that is not as great of a fit. Sometimes I find myself just trying to catch up with the science that I don't really understand. And then the other thing is like the mix of engineering and science, I think, is very blended in this game, which is not so much the case in my real life.
Yeah, and I am in no way a scientist. I don't even play one on TV other than the NPCs I play here on the podcast. My knowledge and my connection with several folks who are scientists is pretty much that a lot of the engineering pieces, the let's make a device based on this knowledge, is like the scientists will do the study, they'll do the experiments, they'll do the testing, and then that is given to manufacturers, and that's where engineers kind of tip in. And while engineers have to have knowledge of a scientific process, and scientists should in theory have knowledge of basic engineering processes, they're not quite as tight as they seem to be in Star Trek. Is that kind of what your experience is as well?
Yeah, and I think the other nuance with the science is there's really two different wings of modern science, which is academia, and industry. And so an industry might be a whole group of different engineers and scientists working on solving a problem. With academia, it's a little bit, there is still some interacting, but it's more exploratory or like working on a bigger picture. I'm not working with anybody on developing a product, for for example. So I do think that in an industry kind of setting, there would be like maybe a team trying to develop the engineering and the science, and everybody is working together, and they may have their own pieces, but they're like working together. And that's not quite how it works with me. Not that we're not collaborative, but it's just a different kind of flow.
Yeah, just a different workflow. I heard it said, and I won't claim credit for it, but this is how I've always worked it in my head as I've worked towards at some point, maybe if I get to playing a science officer, because I just think there's cool things you get to do depending on the type of character you build. Because I'm fascinated by science and the scientific process and all that. When I was very little, I actually got to go to a hard water experiment at Cornell University and saw the tanks and heard the lectures and all the things they were doing. We're talking back in '76, so it was long before there was a lot of big talk in the public media about the Hadrian Collider and all those types of things. But those are things that I heard just milling about that lab while they were giving this tour to a bunch of kindergartners. So I've always had this fascination with it, even though it's not my field or never going to be my field. I just love it. And from a writing standpoint, I love writing about it
Yeah.
for all of those reasons. But in my head, I always looked at science as the one department on a Starfleet ship that is not regulated in the same way. If your command, the person in charge of the command department is the captain of the ship, then the XO, then the other command functions, whether it be quartermasters, yeomans, communications, what have you. If you're security, there's the person in charge of security, then there's your tactical department, then there's your security teams, then there's your armor and all these other things. But there's that rigid hierarchy, right? Same thing with pretty much every department except for science and medicine. In science and medicine, the way I always thought of it is it doesn't matter what your specific field was, is you're the highest ranking person, so you're in charge of the overall department. So you are an administrator for variant scientists who are in charge of their own things. So you're not in charge of the astrophysics department if you're a biologist. You have your own biology research and things that you do, but you are in charge of, okay, you need these resources to be able to do your experiments. Now I have to get that allocation when I'm talking with the XO and the engineering department, which is what we did in the last quick track. I was trying to bring that out, that it doesn't matter if you're the person doing that specific thing. What matters is you're the person in charge of deciding what resources they have to do that thing. And that interaction between the scientists with the research that they're passionate about, having to say, why does somebody who doesn't know my science get to decide whether or not I can do my science? And I always think that is something that I think it probably came up in some really random, weird Star Trek episode once or twice, but it is never a focus of an episode. And that always bugged me because that fascinated me about this organization that says we're all about science.
Yeah.
Yet, very little focus on the science aspect of each of these characters. So I wanted to bring that to this show, and I thought very early on, this was the thought I had in my head when you first joined the cast. I just wanted to make sure you got a chance to get familiar with it and get ready for it. So it wasn't like hitting you right off the bat with it, but definitely wanted to put you in that situation where your character got to see, all right, I'm deciding who's going to do what first,
Yeah.
even though I'm not doing that thing they are. And so that episode really came out of that thought, which you actually telegraphed very well through your role play and just through conversations that we've had over the course of the last year or so. So I am very happy that kind of worked out to give us the opportunity to display that and talk about that with the audience.
I think the other thing with the science officer that it feels to me is you have the commander being like, this is the mission. Now wrangle your cats and make sure they're all focused on this thing that needs to be accomplished, because you throw a bunch of scientists into a room, they're going to want to do their whatever they want, they're excited about. But sometimes you need to be like, all right, this is what the commander's saying that we need to focus on to complete the mission. So I felt that throughout the game that we've been playing.
Absolutely. I think that Star Trek Adventures as a role playing game really has the opportunity to do that kind of thing better than any of the television shows have done or could do. I'll be honest with you, unless you're watching a show like House or something that really gets into the nitty gritty of research on issues, and there aren't a lot. I think House is really the only one I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure the audience will tell us there's one or two others out there, but that's the only one I can think of where here's the problem, and you've got various professionals with various focuses and desperate areas of expertise that are combining their talents and their knowledges to come up with a unified solution. And I think that's one of the few shows from a scientific basis, even though that's specifically more medical in nature, that you see that. I just don't see it in relation to the physical sciences in any kind of meaningful way on a show, like maybe an episode here or maybe an episode there, but it's just not featured. And again, for an organization that's about the science, it's one of those things that I feel strongly about making sure is a factor. I'm very pleased that when I play live games, that there's usually somebody always plays the science officer. I think only one live session I've run in the past 6 months has somebody not taken the science officer. Somebody always takes the science officer, which I think is awesome.
Because it's a cool
Um,
role.
it is pretty cool. It is a very cool role. I really look forward to being able to play that in the future, and mostly because I have great examples such as you from which to draw from. Who knows? Maybe I might play Dory and put her on another ship and get her into some kind of trouble because she's
She's
wanting to
sassy.
do. She is sassy, as Orions are often wont to do. We've done some recordings on some of the episodes, getting prepped for, and we've had a relatively short but good conversation here. Is there anything that you're looking forward to in season 3, whether from a game mechanic standpoint or even from a character growth perspective for Lieutenant Neelan?
I think that these last couple recordings have opened up some things for Nerila in a way of coming out of her shell a little bit more. So I'm excited to explore that, even if it's not dealing with extreme disaster on the ship. Also, the relationships that she's forming, I think, are really cool, especially this relationship, this give and take with Tanari, especially as he's doing his bold engineering and she's doing her bold science and just creating really incredible things. So I'm really excited about exploring that more too.
Awesome. I will definitely keep that in mind. I know Josh is excited for season 3. I think I've got the first couple episodes for season 3 when we get started. But when Josh jumps in, I know he's going to have a lot of good, exciting stuff for everybody. And with that, I think we're going to bring this one to a close. But thanks again for all you do, all you've done for the show, and really appreciate you being a part of this cast. I have said often that one of the biggest challenges with being the game master for this group, and Josh has agreed with me, is that we are dealing with people who are actually experts in the fields for the characters they play in many regards. Adam playing Ocean, he does cybersecurity. Tanari, he's a civil engineer. You are a scientist playing the lead scientist, and Joe administrates with housing and managing all kinds of calamity and craziness that goes on there. So, with all you being experts in your characters' fields of expertise, it actually puts the onus on Josh and myself to try to put a little more research into what we do. Like, I do actually spend some time, while it may be a bit of a pop culture science, I do try to make sure when I try to do some scientific things, I'm at least starting from some legitimate scientific sources, and then I can zhuzh it up with some Star Trek technobabble. But I'm often trying to come up with something that's cool and evocative and has some basis in theoretical reality, if not reality.
It's
Thank you
really,
for making it a challenge that is fun for me.
thank you for letting me play. This has been a really rewarding experience so far, and I'm glad that you guys are letting me continue on to the next season.
Awesome. Wouldn't have it any other way. With that, have a great night, Lacey. Thanks again. And to our audience, we would just want to say thank you very much. Get out there, play some games, roll some dice. If you're playing STA, second edition is out. The starter kit just came out. At the time of recording, you can pre-order it and have the PDF immediately. It's a fantastic resource, especially if you're considering being the person who runs for your home game or your home group. As a player, it has great value, but you might want to go with the quick start and the core book as your primary resource and eventually coming back for the starter kit. But the resources that come with the starter kit are amazing. Great dice, all the tokens, and a bunch of good materials to help you get you started. And I have run one of the adventures so far. Amazing. The second act of the first adventure, lights out. It was almost as exciting as having the Kurgan walk through the halls of the Dilamus Christian. Equally as exciting, I dare say. I had a similar reaction, in fact, with the players at the table as your reaction in that scene. So get out there, throw some dice, make your next games legendary.